just in time for Thanksgiving this week. And this technique is an old-fashioned style candy that is basically pure sugar with some nuts, but it's going to show you how to do the components of basic candy making, right, with boiling the sugar and things like that. So I have a bunch of stuff already set up. I'm going to get started right off the bat because we want to get this going on the stove. But like I said, feel free to ask questions in the chat if need be. So the first thing I'm going to use is a heavy bottom saucepan, right? So something that's going to sit real sturdy on the stove. This heats well. It's got a copper core on the inside. You know, it's a good size. It's not super big, right? But you need to be able to hold at least 4 cups worth of liquid easily without coming too high up on the pan because we don't want the sugar boiling over. So this is not a low-calorie recipe. Like I said, this is an old-fashioned candy, which is basically built off of pure sugar, okay? So this recipe is going to get 3 level cups of sugar in the saucepan. And I have here a rubber spatula that is heat resistant, so it can go up to high temperatures. You can also use a wooden spoon, right? So 2 and 3 full cups of sugar. So make sure they're nice and level, okay? Then this is also going to get 2/3 of a cup of just cold water. Okay. Now the key with making the sugar syrup is we're going to get this on the stove and get it boiling. You can stir it until it boils, but once it starts to boil, we want to leave it alone. Okay. Now this is just a light corn syrup. So it's going to be a 1/2 cup of corn syrup. This is like real, you know, thick, not as thick as honey. What this is going to do is going to help stop that sugar from crystallizing into little crunchy bits. We don't want that. We want a nice, smooth sugar syrup. Okay. And scrape out as much as we can there, right? And it is sticky and gooey. So you can just give this sugar mixture a stir, right? So this was the 3 cups of sugar, 2/3 of a cup of water, and a 1/2 cup of light corn syrup. Okay, you don't want to use dark because we want this candy to be nice and bright white. Okay, so there's your sugar slurry. Okay, so now this is going to go on my stove back here, and I'm going to turn that up onto high. I need that to come up to a boil. So you're going to want to have either a digital thermometer or a candy thermometer that clips onto the side of the pan. Okay, that can go to high temperatures because this is going to need to boil up to 252 degrees. So it's going to be super hot. So I have a towel here handy too for picking the pan up off the burner because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be whipping up some egg whites for this Divinity candy and adding that sugar syrup into the egg whites. So because of raw eggs, we need to cook them, right? We don't want scrambled eggs though in our candy. So we want something that has a meringue texture. So this is how you would start, you know, with a basic meringue. With the hot sugar syrup, we'll also cook our raw eggs, right, to avoid things like salmonella. So what I've got here, like I said, I've got that pot on the stove. I can stir this right now while it's heating up. Once this comes up to a boil, you want to just leave it alone, though, and just watch the temperature until it gets to 252 degrees. Okay, that's going to take a couple of minutes while we're setting up this other stuff. So I've got here a bowl, and I'm going to crack 2 large eggs, but I only want the egg whites because we want this to be a really nice, bright white meringue. We don't want the yolks. Okay. So when you're cracking your eggs, make sure that you're getting just the white. And what you can do is you can pour this into your hand, right? And you can cradle that yolk. You don't need to throw the yolk out. I do have another bowl here to save, right? And you can add that into some scrambled eggs. Now, if you get any of these broken with the egg yolk in there, you want to make sure that you put that to the side and start with a new egg. Okay, so we don't want any little bits of yolk. So I'm just going to pour these into a mixer over here on the side. I'm going to show you that in a second. Okay, so I'm just cracking that open. I'll let it fall through my fingers. Okay, and throw the yolk in the bowl. And like I said, I can save that yolk to use that for scrambled eggs. Just add another whole egg into that, you know, making omelets, things like that. Or you can freeze them. Okay. So my sugar's not quite boiling yet. But what I've got here is my baby, right? You guys know all I love purple, right? So I've got my purple mixer here. And I've got the paddle attachment on it here to whip our egg whites. And this is what's going to whip the candy after we add in the sugar syrup. So it's just got the 2 egg whites in here. So the key to this, though, is to make sure that this is impeccably clean. So anytime you're trying to whip egg whites, that's why we wanted to be real careful getting the yolk out, is that it will not whip to a proper meringue consistency, whether you're making candy or an icing, you know, like an Italian meringue, buttercream, or things like that. If there's any fat mixed in at the beginning, the egg whites won't whip. So what I did with this bowl earlier is I washed it with really good hot soapy water, and I wiped it out with a little bit of white vinegar on a paper towel. That will make sure that there's no grease residue, and I did that on the paddle attachment as well to make sure that that was nice and clean. Okay. So my candy is in process here. So I've got that sugar syrup. It's getting ready to boil, and it doesn't take long once it gets up to that boiling point to get to the 252 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to partially whip these egg whites just to get them going. So I want to get them to like a soft meringue. So it means that like the spoonful will kind of be droopy still. And I'll show you that in a second. Now, if you don't have a stand mixer, you can use a little hand mixer. That's fine for this. Just know that it may get a little bit thick and rough. So make sure that it's a newer hand mixer, not too old. You don't want to burn out the motor. Show you that process of egg whites starting to take some shape. So they're starting to get a little bit frothy, but I want them to be able to hold their structure. Okay. So think of, you know, meringue. This recipe kind of ends up looking a little bit like a marshmallow fluff consistency. Let that do its thing. So this is starting, just about to start to boil. Scrape it down the side. Pull the spatula out to the side and let this sit. Now, because this is a hot sugar syrup, it does make a mess. It is extremely hot and will burn your steak. So you have to be super careful. So when you're looking at your egg whites, I said, I want to get it so it's at least foamy, right, in the structure, what we call like a soft peak, right? It's got a little bit of texture to it, but not a lot. I don't want to go too far right now because I'm going to need to turn this back on when I'm ready to put the hot syrup in, okay, which is starting to boil back here right now. So I wanted to show you guys that. Now, at this point, you want to leave that sugar syrup alone, okay? You want to avoid that urge to stir it or do anything else. Because what will happen is if you start to stir it too much while it's in the boiling process, right? So we're trying to get to what we call like a hardball stage for our candy, that this will start to crystallize. So the only thing that you want to do is insert a thermometer to take the temperature of it. And when it gets close to that 252, I'll turn my mixer back on low speed. So it'll be ready to start pouring my sugar syrup in. Okay, so right now I'm at 220. Like I said, it doesn't take long to get up to that 252 once it does start boiling. But this is something you can't leave unattended, right? You got to stay with it on the stove, right? But a lot of good old-fashioned candy is made through these type of methods. Lots of sugar, boiling some sort of sugar syrup, right, to produce a nice soft candy. And the Divinity candy is a southern candy that's it's kind of like a meringue, kind of like a nougat, you know, so like you think of that creamy kind of chewy center in a lot of your popular candy bars, same type of texture. So we're at about 232, so we got to get to 252, so 252 is where we're headed with this. This is getting close. Okay. So we're gonna let that just do its thing for a minute. Grab some thyme. Now you can use any kind of nut in this that you like, right? So if you like pecans, if you like almonds, you can use those. It would be great with pistachios, walnuts as well. You could leave them plain, but you want to have a little something in there besides just sugar, right? You want to have a little bit of structure to it. Okay. So this is boiling. It's getting plenty hot. We're at 238. Gotta get to that 252. This is the part that seems like it takes forever, right? Wait for that last little 10 degrees. But that is important, okay? Because that's gonna give us the right consistency of the candy. So if I pull it off too soon, it's not gonna set right and properly, okay? So we're at 240.5 to be technical. 241. Now it's starting to go a little faster, a little faster. Okay, you can see this bubbling away here. All right, see that going real quick. So we're just trying to get close to that 252 to get that mixer going again. Now, making sure that when you're taking the temperature on this candy as well, that you're not touching the thermometer on the bottom of the pan, that you're keeping it in the center of the liquid so that you're getting a true reading. You're touching the bottom of the pan, you're getting the temperature from the burner, not the actual sugar. Okay, so this is at about 245. So I'm going to turn this back on. My egg whites just whipped back up a little bit. Like I said, I already kind of pre-started them, but I want to go in a little more fluff. So I'm at 248, 29. So we got 2 degrees to go, 250. Now, as soon as this hits the 252, I'm going to pull it off the burner. 251, 252. Okay. And just be careful setting this to the side because it does have hot sugar on it, so don't touch the end of your thermometer. Okay. And now, at this point, we're going to go back to the machine. Okay. Now, this hot sugar syrup needs to get poured in to our whipping egg whites. So you're going to want to have a towel, pot holder. Okay. I'm going to pour this down the side of the bowl. So I'm resting the pan on the edge of the bowl. And I want to have a nice thin stream of the hot sugar. I don't want to add this in too fast because I don't want scrambled egg whites. I want meringue. And I'm trying to pour this down on the side of the bowl. This will take about a minute to get it all in there. You got to be nice and slow and steady. Because you don't want this hot sugar syrup splashing back at you, right? So always have this on the lowest possible speed when you're doing this. This is why a stand mixer comes in handy. Like I said, you can do this with a hand mixer, but you want to have a second person. Somebody to pour the sugar syrup in and somebody to have the beaters mixing on low. Nice and slow and steady. Hot syrup in there. And I'm going to show you what it looks like inside the bowl. Almost. So you want that stream to be a little skinnier than a pencil. As much as you can. And that's it. Now we'll show you what was inside. You saw the egg whites by themselves before, but now look at that, right? You'll see there's a little splash of a sugar syrup on the side. That's fine. That'll just stay there and get washed off later, okay? So what I'm going to do now at this point is turn this up because I need to cool it down quickly. This is going to take a couple of minutes. I know it might be a little hard to hear, so I'm going to be a little bit louder, okay? But I need this to cool down so that way I can mix in my nuts. So what I've got right now is 1 cup's worth of pecans. And I just want to rough chop these up because these are whole pecans. So you just want a good chef's knife and a cutting board, right? And I've got my little wet towel underneath so it's not sliding. And you just want to run your knife through the nuts. kinds is a great combination. Like I said, walnuts, pistachios, almonds. All good choices. Whatever your favorite happens to be. You could do this with peanuts as well. Just always watch out for anybody who's in the family with nut allergies. So they don't have to be super small. I like candy with a little bit of texture to it, right? You get some slightly bigger pieces, you can just chop those up. But just a rough chop. Now, if you were going to use almonds, I would go with a sliced, like they call it slivered almond, right? Instead, it's got a little bit more texture. I'm going to be doing some of those in other demos later today. Sliced almonds might be a little bit too brittle, and whole almonds would be a little bit too much. You'd want to chop them up. I know it's a little noisy, but I want you guys to kind of see what's happening here, right? So this is really on the soft side. It is very watery, right? It's like a melted marshmallow fluff. Okay, so it's getting close though, but I want it to be able to just kind of hold its shape if I can puddle it, and it's not quite there yet. You see it's really hot because I got a little steam on the mixer happening here too. But this mixer is now cooling down to the touch too. You still feel it really hot on the side of the bowl. So we're just letting that cool slightly. And then now for this time for our application, right, we're going to use the cookie sheet. And I'm just going to put a little bit of parchment paper on top. Sorry, wax paper. You can use parchment or wax. Either one is fine. But this is one of those few times in candy making that wax paper does work really well for sticky candy, right? Things like saltwater taffy or Divinity candy. I want to check my candy mixture. I want to be able to plop this down. It's still a little bit too stringy, but I want to mix in the nuts at this point, okay? So I'm just going to add in the pecans. That's why I wasn't worried too much about chopping them because they're going to get crushed just a little bit in the mixer as they go. And I'm looking for a texture that's spoonable, right? Something that I can dollop down onto that tray. That's going to be it right here. Right? You see it's still a little bit goopy, but it's mostly holding into the spoon. Right? Now, candy making is a mess, right? It's all sugar. It's all sweet. But the nice thing is, some really hot water, it all washes away, right? So if you got anything that's really super sticky and just won't come off, just boil some water in a pan or a kettle and use that to clean off your tools, right? What I'm going to do afterwards is that pot that I had the sugar syrup in, I'm going to fill that halfway with water, turn it back on high to boil it. All that stuff will boil right out, and I don't have to worry. Okay, so that's my Divinity candy mixture there with the nuts. So at this point, we need to drop it pretty quickly onto the cookie sheet with the wax paper. Okay, and this doesn't have to be fancy, right? This is an old-fashioned candy. This is not meant to be extra fancy, right? So I'm just going to try and hit these corners first. I'm just using 2 tablespoons. Teaspoons is fine. And I'm going to the corners to try and help stabilize my wax paper. You can also take a little dab of candy underneath the wax paper. But this will work just as well, right? So little dollops of your Divinity candy. It says any kind of nut and flavoring works great. But you want to work fairly quickly at this point because this will start to get much harder to work with as it goes. You'll see those first ones might tend to puddle a little bit. It's okay. It's just an extra big one. But there's really no clean way of doing this, right? Because it's candy. That's okay. Little blobs of goo. Yumminess. Might as well make a candy out of this little blob there, right? Now these will set up in a few minutes. They're not, that's, you know, up to a half hour, you know, to be set all the way through. It's nothing that needs to be refrigerated. They will last for a good week if they're not eaten before that, right? But also, you'd want to let them cool completely and dry to the touch on the surface. Right? And you can see the consistency changing on these, right? So you can see those first ones were really kind of thin, where these ones here are getting much thicker as we go. And that's because that temperature of that candy is already coming down and setting itself up. So it does cool quickly. So this is something you want to work fast with. And you're going to get quite a few of these. You can make them smaller. You can make them bigger. It's just a nice little old-fashioned candy treat. You know, that you could give as gifts because it's fast to make. Right? You just want to be extra careful at that stove. Like I said, when you're boiling that sugar, right? That's the thing that you need to keep eye on the most when you're handling that pot with the sugar. That you're doing so very carefully. Okay. Quite a few out of this batch. Right. That one's probably a little bit too big, but that's okay. There you go. Okay. So when you see these, you can see this one's already pretty much set up. Right. It's very light. It's pillowy. Okay. This will set up all the way through and have that nice meringue, slightly nougat texture to it. But that is the Divinity candy, right? Nice and easy. Just remember, really pristine, clean bowl, nothing with grease or residue on it for your mixing bowl and your paddles and things like that, or your saucepan that your sugar's in. Remember not to stir the sugar once it starts to boil. And as soon as it hits 252 degrees, that's when you need to pull it off the heat to add it into your already whipped egg whites. And then any of the nuts and things that you do, you can change from that point on, okay? So that is the Grandma's Divinity candy. So the recipe's in your Google Classroom, but it's also going to be posted with the video.